Amongst the many interesting and historical houses in Hampstead, perhaps one stands out, the imposing Kenwood House, which is an English heritage property.
Welcome to Kenwood House. My name is Jerzy Kierkuć-Biliński. I'm the curator of the Ivy Bequest, so I have the rather lovely job of looking after this beautiful 18th century villa and the extraordinary collection of paintings it houses.
Could you tell me a bit about the history of this wonderful building?
Well, a house has stood here at Kenwood since about 1616, but really the house as it appears today is the product of two building phases dating to the 18th century. The house was acquired by a Scottish gentleman, William Murray, in 1754. Now, Murray had trained as a barrister in London, and he's best remembered today as a towering figure of British legal history. Many of the cases he tried concerned the slave trade, and these led to the formation of the first abolitionist movements in this country, which finally came to fruition at the beginning of the 19th century with the abolition of slavery in the British Empire. When he acquired Kenwood in 1754, acquired quite a small, plain house, and he soon realised that this house was rather too mediocre for his purposes. He got a young up-and-coming Scottish architect called Robert Adam to work on the building. Adam remodelled the house, transforming what was a relatively modest villa into this neoclassical building that we see today. He added a beautiful north portico, a grand imposing entranceway to the house. He remodelled the ground floor rooms, most notably erecting a beautiful and celebrated library. It's considered one of Robert's masterpieces in architecture, as well as creating a beautiful south front which overlooks the landscape grounds with views down to London.
Talking about the library, I noticed the ceiling in there was particularly ornate.
Yes, Murray clearly spent all his budget when doing up Kenwood on the library. It was built from scratch. It's not part of the earlier remodelled house. He collected books, he loved books, and he employed Adam to create a room really that looks back to Roman architecture. Robert had spent 4 years in the 1750s in Italy, learning about classical architecture, meeting the great European architects and artists who were working in Italy at that time. Once he came back to London and set up his architectural practice, he decided that he would draw upon those lessons. And that's really what the ceiling and wall paintings in the library at Kenwood are. They're not just decorative, they're there to evoke the great Italian collection of classical paintings.
What can you tell me about the collection within the house?
The collection of paintings in the house is relatively small, but it's absolutely choice. Kenwood was acquired in 1925 by Edward Cecil Guinness, the first Earl of Ivy. Guinness was the sole proprietor of the Guinness Brewery when it was floated on the stock market, and at the age of 38, he basically retires. It's quite nice if you can do that. And he indulges, one of his pastimes, if you can call it that, was collecting paintings. He in fact made his first major purchase of a painting at the age of 27. He buys a Rembrandt. Again, very nice if you've got the money to do that. But once he's retired, he starts collecting in a more concentrated manner. He collects mainly in the 1890s up until the early 20th century. He acquires a collection of 300 paintings, exceptional works, paintings by Rembrandt, as I say, Hogarth, Watteau, but also Guinness forms a taste for 18th century British portraiture. These paintings by artists such as Gainsborough and Reynolds are just coming onto the art market, and Guinness starts collecting them, and he collects the finest examples. Now, in 1925, he decides that he wants to make a gift to the nation, and he acquires Kenwood and the surrounding estate, not to live in. He intends to use Kenwood as a setting for 63 paintings from his private collection, which he handpicks. And these are the paintings that you can now see at Kenwood, although the collection has grown. The paintings in Kenwood were intended to create a type of romantic feeling. Guinness wanted you to come to Kenwood, walk through the beautiful landscape grounds, enter this delectable 18th century villa and view these paintings. The idea being that you would have the impression that these paintings have always been here, that this is the taste of an 18th century gentleman connoisseur. But actually, when you look at the paintings he selected, these really reflect his own personal interests. He loved field sports, so we have many hunting scenes. He was a fine yachtsman, so we have paintings by Turner and 17th century Dutch maritime artists such as Cuyp. He also, quite clearly, looking at the selection here, had an eye for society ladies, because there are very few portraits of men in the collection. The other aspect of his interest as a collector, as a connoisseur, was Dutch art of the 17th century. And we have two of the greatest paintings in any collection in Britain, a work by Rembrandt, his Portrait of an Artist of 1665, and a tiny jewel-like painting by Johannes Vermeer, the guitar player, of 1672. These are absolutely exceptional paintings that have an international significance.
Now, we talked briefly about the gardens and the grounds. Can we go into a bit more detail?
Kenwood was quite an extensive estate in the 17th and 18th centuries, and it appears that in the 18th century the grounds were quite formally designed. In fact, they contained many specimen plants. Kenwood at that point belonged to the Earl of Bute, who, as I'm sure you may know, was instrumental in setting up Kew Gardens. And he used Kenwood as a type of retreat to undertake scientific studies and experiments. He was interested in botany and science, but also as a place where he could plant some of his specimens, although how they survived and thrived in the rather cold and exposed hills of Hampstead is another question. When Lord Mansfield acquired the house in 1754, he started remodelling the grounds, turning the formal gardens into a more informal English landscape garden. But it's really under the second Earl, the early 1790s, that the grounds take their current form. The second Earl of Mansfield employed Humphrey Repton to remodel the grounds as they appear today. Repton opened up views where you could see London in the distance. So really, as you see Kenwood's grounds today, it's the work of Humphrey Repton.
Do you have a particular room in the house that you feel more at home in, your favourite room?
Well, bar the dining room, which I must say I do love, because it's very rich, warm colours, and of course the paintings. The music room is amazing because you have in the music room some of the greatest paintings, portraits by Sir Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough in any British collection. Particularly Gainsborough's portrait of Mary Countess Howe is an incredible work. Absolutely monumental painting and beautifully handled as well. Gainsborough's handling of the oil paint is absolutely exquisite in that work. Another room I particularly like is a very small room, a very intimate space, Lord Mansfield's former dressing room. It was used really by Mansfield as a type of study, where he would work over his legal papers and documents, and where he would receive his business guests, people he was working with in terms of his legal practice in the centre of London. Its scale, the fact that much of the decorative scheme still survives, does give one a feeling of Mansfield as a man, his presence, and perhaps bring you as close as possible to encountering the person who engaged Robert Adam to create this wonderful house.